It is time for me to start planting some seeds, and I am so excited. Kevin and I have spent quite a bit of time lately dreaming about our gardens for the next year, talking about spring planting, summer planting, even a little bit of fall planting, and I'm really excited that we finally have our spring garden plan done. Today I want to talk with you about our spring garden plan, but also about planting inside in preparation for spring planting. I want to talk with you about what you should plant indoors, but what should just wait and be planted outside in the ground. That's called direct sowing. And I just want to go over some things. I think this is a real awesome teaching opportunity for me and for those of you who are interested in gardening to just go over some of this information. A lot of you have told me that you're new at this. You don't get it. You don't know when to start, you don't know how to grow, and those kinds of things. So today, as I'm starting my own seed planting for the spring, I want to bring you along and talk you through my mindset as far as timing, how to, and those kinds of things. So let's get started. I am so excited to share with you what we have decided to grow in our spring garden. Our family tries to grow as much of our own food as possible so we don't have to rely on the grocery store. So our gardens focus on what can be preserved, what can be frozen, canned, dehydrated, so that we don't have to go to the store. We don't do a whole lot of just planting because it's pretty or to try something new. We like tried and true varieties that are going to be very productive and not have a lot of pressure from diseases or pests. So that's what you're going to see when I talk with you about our spring garden plan. I'm going to show you the little diagram that we have drawn up just to keep us on track so we know what we're supposed to be growing where. This year in our spring garden, we will be growing radishes, spinach, leaf lettuce, head lettuce, beets, kohlrabi, and turnips. We'll be growing cabbage, 2 rows of broccoli, 2 rows of cauliflower, peas, collards, carrots, green onions, and potatoes. So not all of these is it a good idea to start in the house beforehand. So I want to talk with you about things that are okay or even beneficial to grow in the house as a transplant to plant in the garden versus those that are actually best to just plant in the ground. I would say there are about 5 plants that it's best to start in the house and then transplant into the garden for spring planting. Those include broccoli, cauliflower and cabbage, collards, and kale. In my opinion, everything else is best to actually just start right in the garden, direct sown into the ground. So when do you start all of these? When do you start your seeds in the house? When do you start things out in the garden? Well, a lot of that timing is what is pretty intimidating with people, and I'm hoping to be able to break it down so it's not as confusing, okay? The first thing that you need to determine is when is your last frost date? When is the last time that's agreed upon by all of the gardening professionals that it's gonna freeze in your area? You can find that information really easily online. You can really just search last frost date and your zip code, and several different websites will pop up and you can figure that out. Once you figure out your last frost date, then grab your calendar. This is actually my new planner for 2019 and 2020. It's a monthly calendar. So grab your calendar, open it up to your last frost date, and write it on there, last frost date, okay? Because you'll want to refer back to that many times. Now, regarding direct sowing seeds into the garden for spring, most plants you're going to want to put the seed in the ground about 3 to 4 weeks before your last frost date. So just take your calendar, count 3 or 4 weeks before then, and write that in your calendar. Write down every single one of the plants that you're going to plant that day, so you just have it in there. You don't have to keep refiguring all of that. So that's for direct sown. That's pretty easy, okay? Now for the few things that you want to start in the house for your spring garden, you'll want to start those seeds in the house anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks before you'll plant them in the garden. And you'll plant them in the garden 2 weeks before your frost date. So if you go back to your frost date and count back 2 weeks, that's the date that you're going to put the transplants in the ground. Then count back 4 to 6 more weeks on your calendar and mark that date as when you'll start those seeds in the house. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but if you rely on your calendar, everything will be fine. So how much should you plant? A lot of people struggle with how much should you plant. I have struggled with that as well. My first answer to that question is grow as much as you can handle of one thing. How much garden space can you give to one plant? How much of that plant can you handle for processing all at one time? Whether that be through canning or freezing or dehydrating. And if you're wanting to start replacing the grocery store, start thinking about how often you want to eat that, which will tell you how much you need to grow. So for instance, broccoli, okay? If we want to eat about one head or one bunch of broccoli a week, we should be planting at least 50 plants. Same with cauliflower, same with cabbage, those kinds of things. And then when you find out the spacing, you can determine how much row space you need to dedicate in your garden in order to grow a year's worth. If that seems super overwhelming, if you think that the maximum you can possibly handle would be 20 plants, then just put 20 plants in and every year make adjustments from there. One resource that I want to share with you can also help when trying to figure out how much to grow for your family. It is put out by the University of Missouri Extension. It's actually their published vegetable planting calendar. And the first 2 pages talk specifically about how much to plant for each person in your house for fresh eating and for preserving. And I'll make sure to put a link to this in the description, and I will pin a comment with this information. So let's get to starting some seeds. Today I'm going to be starting seeds for broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and collards. We plan to plant 50 of each of those in the garden. If we can't use all of them, or if I run out of space in the freezer or whatever, then we'll sell some of them at the farmer's market. And depending on how well these do in the spring, we may or may not have to also plant them in the fall. So let's get started planting some seeds. I'm gonna start with broccoli. We're gonna be planting Waltham 29 broccoli from Baker Creek. I'm actually gonna be planting an entire flat here. This flat holds 72. I'm hoping to plant 50 plants in the garden. The extras I'll either use, if one like dies, I can, replace it. If I have a bunch of extra, I'll just give them away to friends or neighbors. To keep things straight, because all of these flats look alike, I've actually written on here a letter. So this is tray A. I will record that in my garden notebook and what I've planted there and the date and those kinds of things, so this won't get confusing. If you don't have plug trays like this at home, you can really use anything to start these seeds. You could use little cups, you could use some pots that you have saved and recycled from previous year's plantings and things like that. This is just what works best for us, and this easily fits on my heat mats. Now with broccoli seeds, cauliflower, cabbage, those kinds of things, all the seeds are shaped the same basically, and they're all pretty little. So we're gonna be planting these at about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch underneath the soil. What I like to do is actually just take a pen and use the tip to poke just a little hole down in each one of these cells, and that's where I will place the seed. Now you can choose to either put 1 seed in there or 2, whatever you'd like, but if you end up planting multiple and more than 1 germinates, then at some point you'll need to trim away the extra. After I have the holes in there, I just put some of the seeds in my hand and start dropping 1 or so seeds down into the hole. And then go back and just cover up the hole with a little bit of soil. It's as easy as that. After I have all of the seeds planted, then I go ahead and I water them with a spray bottle just to make sure that the water really gets down in there and starts rehydrating that seed and encourages it to germinate. And I will actually continue watering like this every day, twice a day, until these seeds emerge and germinate, just to make sure that they have all of the moisture that they need. Now, if a seed doesn't have enough moisture, it's not going to germinate. Now, the growing medium that we are starting with is just a seed starting mix. You can get that in bags at Walmart or at any of your garden stores. One tip to having your seeds germinate successfully and quickly is to make sure that this seed starting mix is damp before you start working with it. It'll take a little bit of time and quite a bit of water to rehydrate all of that seed starting mix, but it will really set you up for success if you start with it already in your pots, just at least a little bit damp. And then when you're watering, you're not having to do so much work to keep that seed starting mix hydrated. After you're all finished planting and giving it a good watering, then you'll want to cover these with either a plastic dome like this to kind of create a greenhouse, or if you don't have these, you can use plastic wrap like cling wrap. Just make sure that you're watching them every day. As soon as the seeds germinate, whether you have the plastic wrap or this dome, then you want to take this off. Seeds like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and those kinds of things, the temperature that they germinate best at is about 65 to 75 degrees. So your house may be warm enough and you may not need a heat mat. If you do choose to use a heat mat, make sure that as soon as your seeds germinate, that you take it off the heat mat and make sure that it's under some lights. Sometimes we keep our house a little bit on the cool side, so I'm going to transfer this tray onto a heat mat. Let's go. So this is the area that we do most of our germinating inside the house. And we actually have a really great video that we put out recently that talks about all of our seed starting equipment, what we use, how we use it. So make sure that you check out that video too. So today I'm going to put these trays on our shelves here. I do have a heat mat here, so I will turn on the heat mat and we'll just leave these here just like this to germinate. I'll water them with a spray bottle twice a day. As soon as these seeds germinate, I will start using the lights. I will make sure these guys get light for 12 hours a day, and we'll keep it off for 12 hours. But once they emerge, I will lower these lights down until they're just above the little plants in order to make sure that they don't grow up really fast and get all lanky and unstable and weak. Another thing that I will do is I'll turn on this fan back here and have it oscillate so that it blows over the top of the plants. This will create a really strong, healthy stem on the plant because it simulates wind. If you don't have a fan like this to blow over your seedlings, if you just run your hand over the top of all of your seedlings gently a couple times a day, that will also strengthen them and get them ready to be planted outside. Once my little plants have their first real leaves, I'll do two things. The first thing I will do is transplant them from their little plug tray into bigger pots. Over the next 6 weeks, they will get root bound in those little plug trays, so I need to transfer them. But if you have started your seeds in bigger pots already, you won't have to worry about that. The other thing I'll start doing once they get their first set of real leaves is I will start fertilizing them. Now, we use a natural fertilizer, we use fish emulsion, and when you're fertilizing seedlings, you need to be careful not to use a fertilizer strength that is too harsh on them. So about half the strength of a normal fertilizer is what you want to go for. With the fish emulsion, I use 1 tablespoon of fish emulsion for a gallon of water. And I will use that once a week from the time that they have their first leaves their first true leaves, and until they go right into the garden. On our homestead, we have a greenhouse. So on the nice days after these have germinated, we'll take them out there so they can be exposed to the real sunshine and the elements of outside. But if you don't have a greenhouse, you'll need to be concerned with hardening your seedlings off before they get planted into the garden. Now, hardening off is really just the process of gradually exposing your seedlings to the natural outside environment. In your house, you're babying them with artificial light. They get moisture, they get water twice a day, no movement. It's a really secure environment. And if you would transplant them right from inside into the garden, they would go through what's called transplant shock. So gradually exposing them to the outside elements is something you want to start doing 2 weeks before you put them in the garden. On the first day, put them outside for only an hour. On the second day, 2 hours. And continue gradually exposing them to outside longer and longer until it's the day for them to go into the garden. So I think I've pretty much covered everything. That was a lot of information. If there are still questions that you have, make sure that you put them in the comments section below. I'll do my hardest to answer them, but there's also some really knowledgeable people that follow our channel that help us out, which I really appreciate. If you enjoyed this video and if you're enjoying our channel, please consider subscribing. We would love it. Don't forget to check us out on all of our social media, including Instagram. Go ahead and share this video with people you know who would like the information. And until next time, thank you so much for stopping by the homestead. Take care and God bless.